You know, when you're in the middle of making something and everything seems relevant to that thing. So like you listen to a song and it'll have a lyric and you're like, yes, that's what I think. And it's like that. I remember at that point I had this book that I was carrying around in my bag that I'd never read, short stories by Miranda July. And it was called No One Belongs Here More Than You. Mm. And there was this point when I was like really struggling to like tell this particular story of the village where I live. And I knew I wanted to come and do this project here. And I wasn't living here at the time. And I lifted that book from my bag, all folded up and creased and, you know, having with all good intentions of reading this book at some point. And I just read the title, No One Belongs Here More Than You. And sometimes I have to come back to that as this idea of, if I believe that everyone has a value to share their story, if everyone has a right, if I believe everyone is an artist, which I do, then why can't I be one?
Hello, I'm Ali John and I'm here to welcome you back to Crafted Reality, the podcast where we dive into the world of play, story and technology, exploring the ways we can craft experiences that shape how we see the world. We had lots of lovely feedback about last month's episode, where Julian and I were joined by Lisa Heledd Jones, a storyteller, artist and producer. So we decided to share some extra content from our conversation with her. We discussed more about her creative process and what inspires her. Remember, if you're enjoying the podcast and want to support the work we do, consider heading over to our Patreon page. The link is in the show notes.
It's so interesting, like listening to your process and the way you've kind of gone about your work and things like that over the years, and almost to the level that it pretty much, it could be slightly out of time-wise, but pretty much kind of mirrors how me and Ali kind of made work, but in a totally opposite way, maybe until recently. Like the kind of, when you were mentioning the shop, and you were mentioning you come into the shop and you see something familiar, and then, you know, immediately, and you see the sofa and things like that, and you make people feel comfortable and things, and you're in essence dealing with fact. And when we started, we dealt with fiction and fantasy and, you know, and that kind of stuff, and everything is almost the same but also totally opposite. So the familiar thing in the shop is when we were making street games, our first location was the shortest distance from the start to the first location. It was like 3 or 4 minutes. So it got people invested in a genre, in a world, but it wasn't so far that they got bored and walked away. The idea of making people feel safe and that, we total opposite. We wanted to make people feel like they would suddenly come, you know, to feel transported in a unsafe environment, potentially, if we're talking about like a ghost game or something like that.
Otherworldly.
Yeah, exactly. But both very much going into portals, you know, yourself and us. And the level of your portal is the layer in the city that we add. You know, we add a layer into the city. And I guess the idea of safe, our terminology was permission and agency. You know, it's kind of like these really almost identical, but then total divergent in terms of the thing. I mean, we know, and then you're telling a story they know, and we're making a story for them to retell afterwards. Because, you know, as a group, you know, well, not always, but, you know, I'm kind of stretching here a little bit, but, you know, you're generally telling an individual story. We're telling a story of 6 people that have potentially never met each other before, coming together and then retelling a story after. It's so fascinating how they're all, there's, the mechanisms are almost identical, the language is almost identical, and I think it is almost, and I could be wrong and maybe needs a bit more thought, but I think it is almost the difference between fact and fiction to a degree. You know, like you know, that kind of outcome is in a sense a factual representation of their belief and what they thought, and then there's this fiction thing of like, and it's a different thing, one's entertainment to a degree, not saying, but yeah, just really interesting the differences.
But they're both spaces that offer people an opportunity to come together, whether they know it or not. I mean, I guess with the street games, people knew that they were going to be in a group of 6 with people perhaps they did or didn't know. And I suppose that hour of shared experience, joined people together in a way that I think people found really unexpected, because they had to often work together, understand the story together, piece it together, and then they're creating a story that will eventually become their story afterwards. Oh, I met X, Y, and Z on this journey, and then we did this, and then we went there, and we found this, and all of that. And I guess the same with the shop, isn't it? People come maybe to share a piece of their story, but maybe they find somebody else within that space who can fill in the gaps or can, enrich part of the narrative, because I guess it's a shared space for them around a particular topic, for example. So it's sort of maybe,
But I wonder, do you see yourselves as facilitators? Because I think that's kind of where a lot of this crosses over. Like there's a lot of it's actually, and you used the word curator before, Ali, and I think that's like there have been times when I have called myself a curator, but there are so many connotations with all of these different words that are sometimes really unhelpful. But do you see yourselves as like facilitators of those experiences, those like, what did you call yourselves?
I think when you mentioned that earlier about facilitator, there's 2 bits to it, I think, and I think it depends on how much you want to control something. I think it's all about control, and I think particularly within the earlier works we did when it was more game like, I think the stuff more recently that Ali's specifically been getting involved is much more to the realm, it much more in the same feel as what you've described today. But I think you go from facilitator at one end to almost puppeteer or puppet master at the other end. And I think that's a genuine, and in that is definitely curator, in that is also maitre d', they're all of these, and all of them have different angles that I think are at a moment, a bit like you saying how you have tools or you have ways of kind of not everyone's gonna tell you the story in the same process. And I think ebbs and flows of experiences make you or need you to be, and maybe facilitator could work across the whole thing, but it's, I guess, the difference between a passive facilitator, an active facilitator, and by default that is facilitator, but there is a way of you increasing energy, decreasing energy, within rooms and conversations.
Well, influencing, isn't it? Space and conversation and direction of things.
Yeah, and you've got an agenda as a facilitator, but then equally your agenda shouldn't turn into being, it's me, I'm the famous one now, listen to me, that kind of thing. That's when you start performing, for sure. But I think, I think it's definitely puppeteer at one end, or puppet master, sorry, at one end, and facilitator. And I think you go up and down that depending on where you are within the thing you're making. Because I definitely think when we're making a experience, at some point you kind of have to make sure they see or experience this thing, because if they don't know about that,
miss it.
And suddenly they don't know the code to unlock the door or something like that. That's pretty key. So I think, and that's where you have to force it, I think. But I don't know, do you have any thoughts about what your thoughts are?
I think it's been quite hard to describe what we do. I think, again, we've gone through a number of labels that do and work to varying degrees for people to understand for a while, and sometimes we do still call ourselves a marketing company, but that kind of has connotations of quite traditional marketing methods, whereas I guess what we do is bring people together to tell a story,
often that's maybe for other people, so to help in organizations connect to audiences through story and experience, which is obviously not very neat and quite long. So I think facilitator is an interesting word.
I mean, I think it's a crap word, don't get me wrong.
It is, yeah.
I don't like it, but I can't find a word which sort of I feel most comfortable with, because I'm definitely not like an my favorite documentary is called Lift. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's on YouTube. It's like 25 minutes long, and there's a man, I've forgotten his name now, Mark something is his name, the documentary maker. He hasn't made many documentaries, but all of his work I love. And he in this documentary, he's in a lift, and he just spends weeks in this lift with a camera. And then people who live in this, it's a lift in like a tower block of flats, and people come into the lift, and then like at first they just ignore him, and then over time, and we as a viewer, like we can see him in like the mirrors of the lift and stuff. Like him as a documentary maker is never missing. We know he is there, and also like that's what then slowly people start telling him their stories in the lift, and so their world kind of start emerging to you in this very short but I think honestly perfect documentary. And I think there is something just so interesting about the idea that we know he's there in the room, and I think this idea of being invisible it's what I sort of want, but I also know that that's like, I am a maitre d'. I know that I am actually to a certain degree like without me this would not, this whatever it is would not be happening. And so finding the way to be the documentary guy who's both in the footage, but also it's not about him, it's about the people who are coming in the lift. That's kind of always the tension in a way, like so it's somehow, but I don't know what the word is for it because that's how I've tried to describe it, by explaining a documentary that lasts 25 minutes.
It is you mentioned it earlier with the collection of sounds on the farm and being an archaeologist, and also in effect being an anthropologist.
Yeah, that's true.
And then I just started, when you say who am I? You're just Indiana Jones, because she's both famous, but he's also he's also into looking at old stuff and collecting them. You know what I mean? It's this kind of like really, because it is always to that level, isn't it? Where this person is famous, like. Obviously in the thing, he's like famous for being a known archaeologist, but also he's got his whip, his hat, and his gun. It's kind of a bit of both, really. It's quite funny.
Something that's helped me more recently, and I say helped because genuinely this tension that we're talking about has been a problem in my practice, because I've had experiences of being invited to do quite quote unquote exciting projects or things, but I would have to be like very named and out there, and I feel it creates such a discomfort that I've had emails and I've thrown my phone to the other side of the room, literally, because I've been like, I want to do that so much, but I also don't want to make myself public in that way. And so it's something I've come back to and from a lot. And so one of the things that I've done a bit of, because I did do a drama masters, and that was I'd never done any drama in my life. I didn't do drama in GCSE or anything, I had never done any kind of performance in that way. And I started creating walks, site-specific walks with people and taking them, and then so being very much the person guiding and storytelling in an environment. And there was it was just and I did that as part of my masters to start with, and then I've done that a number of times since. and I feel like I can do a good job of it, but I am deeply, deeply uncomfortable at the same time. And also I find it easy. It's like all of that at the same time. And when there's, when you're in the middle of making something and everything seems relevant to that thing. So like you listen to a song and it'll have a lyric and you're like, yes, that's what I think. And it's like that. I remember at that point I had this book that I was carrying around in my bag that I'd never read, short stories by Miranda July, and it was called No One Belongs Here More Than You. And there was this point when I was like really struggling to like tell this particular story of the village where I live, and I knew I wanted to come and do this project here, and I wasn't living here at the time. And I lifted that book from my bag, all folded up and creased, and having with all good intentions of reading this book at some point, and I just read the title, No One Belongs Here More Than You. And sometimes I have to come back to that as this idea of, if I believe that everyone has a value to share their story, if everyone has a right, if I believe everyone is an artist, which I do, then why can't I be one? If I believe that everyone has a story to tell, then it's okay that I also tell them. And it's something that I have to come back to. The other thing that's been really, really helpful is the book, The Art of Gathering, by Priya something, I've forgotten her surname. But in there she talks about generous authority. And that concept of generous authority has been like game changing for me in terms of every time. So I run my local WI, although we've just left the WI and we're now going to be our own institution. But like, I'm on different committees and I'm involved in different things in my community. And I have this same discomfort of being this like orchestrator and like, but that idea of generous authority, it helps me like take a deep breath and go, you're not being an arsehole because you've said at the beginning of an event, could everyone sit down, please? Like, or, you're guiding someone on a storytelling walk. Like, I'm not being arrogant or showing off. That weird sort of sense of don't be rude, don't show off. And I think generous authority. So puppet master is one word, generous authority is another word for potentially the same thing. It's like, for a lot of people, to believe that you're creating something, whether that's a game in the middle of a city and you're getting them to see their city differently, like someone needs to have generous authority to make that possible, or else we just keep going about our days ignoring the sounds of the fence, ignoring the sounds of birds, ignoring like how maybe our neighbours, people on the street, and the idea of creating a whole new way of seeing the cityscape or my village hall or whatever. Like, that's, someone needs to play the role of generous host, and and that's been so helpful because, and I think that's where I'm at the moment, is coming back to this idea that it's okay, and that I can keep making. So in the last few years, I've set up my website again. There are things like that, there are just periods of time where I've just been, I don't know, so deeply uncomfortable by the idea that I'm sort of being controlling or something. I don't know.
It's sort of strange that kind of that voice creeps in, isn't it? Where there's no truth in those thoughts really at all. They're just a narrative that you've started telling yourself somehow along the way.
I guess it's imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah,
Maybe?
yeah. If we're going to label it, I suppose it is, isn't it? And I think sometimes with our work, you kind of go, oh, well, I've written this or we're creating this. Who wants to hear it or who wants to listen to it? Maybe nobody does. Maybe we won't make it. It's kind of quite easy to do that quite quickly, and I think you end up talking yourself out of stuff often, or I do anyway, because you're just unsure about your voice sometimes, I think, or your creative voice or your creative practice in that way that, oh, actually, we'll nobody want to engage with it because, I don't know, it's not that good, which is, again, just an opinion that that voice in your head often kind of likes to, tell you because,
So do you, as a team, the two of you, do you support, do you balance each other's thinking in that way, Because I don't know, but I see you, Julian, as someone who keeps moving forward. Like, you keep moving, keep going up the stairs. But you do keep moving, and Ali, are you someone who's thinking about the atmosphere and then but is there a reason? Is this do you support each other to just keep going so that you do keep making? Because you make so much stuff.
Yeah, I guess there's a few things, isn't there? I think Ali, there's this, it's kind of interesting, isn't it? I guess it's when, probably before this, but I became aware of the idea of community art, specifically, I guess, when National Theatre Wales set up, the idea of that kind of, the assembly that was alongside National Theatre Wales, and the idea that you could be exploring issues within the community and then kind of work with that community and make art. And I think that basically is literally a Xerox of user-centered design in design processes. But then the output then is not necessarily a functional, very broad term, but a website or something like that. It could be just the engagement is enough. It could be an output is also needed, or also is something that comes out, and an output being like a show or something like that. So I think there's this kind of conversation personally in my head as to whether, like you said, whether you're an artist, designer, whatever. I've long past caring in a way. The only thing that is important, I think, is that you continue to make, whether that has audience or not audience. I go back and forth as to whether that's important, because making is intrinsic to me. Yes, it's nice to get a ego slap on the back that someone has paid a ticket or watched it or listened to it or bought a t-shirt or bought a design or whatever. That's nice and does pay the bills for sure. But it's not why I do it. It's not why I've ever done it. And I definitely feel in our team, I definitely am the one that starts things. Really, really dislike finishing them though. Really dislike finishing them.
Yeah.
We were talking about this yesterday.
We were, yeah. You're definitely the instigator of threads of projects or thoughts, and then I think I am very good at picking up on those things and then finishing them. Again, I do like a deadline. I love a deadline. So I think I'm less, and I don't know if it's a confidence thing, I am less likely to start a project. I might have ideas and thoughts and thinking, but then I always find it difficult to put words to the page, sometimes physically or just metaphorically, just that starting point. But if somebody starts something, I will run with it and I will complete it. So in some ways, we do.
Yeah, that's a really good complementary.
I mean, if we were both people that liked starting stuff, we'd be absolutely screwed.
5,000 projects down, none completed. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. I think it's interesting as well. It's like the things you talk about earlier about depth of understanding of a thing. So I think there's it's almost like when we're making things, an idea. I think ideas are totally irrelevant. I don't think ideas are anything these days. I think it's the implementation and the angle you take on that idea. So I think anyone can have an idea or a concept, and then it's your interpretation of that and you seeing it through. I think otherwise, if you don't do anything on them, they're just kind of like, they float away and they're kind of nothing. But I think the idea of, and why did I say that? Okay, so I said that because, so we can see the city as we walk through every day. We've spoken about the fact that you can make a game and you can radically change your perception of the city. You can stand by an air conditioning unit and understand it in a different way again. We can get really frustrated when there's a car next to us that's idling. You know, all those kind of different juxtapositions of things. And I think I've always seen bits of a project that could be scattered. If we talk about its duration, it could be the start of a project, it could be a scene halfway through, or it could be this point here and that kind of stuff. But I don't think I'm necessary, and I don't know enough about how writers work, but I never see myself as writing or creating a story. It's all these moments. And I think Ali's then kind of always been this person that just kind of is able to actually then make, and story is an ambiguous word in this sense, but make the whole from it. Because I'm still like, maybe it's a bit like a director or like a film, where you're seeing these scenes and you're kind of seeing these bits, and then you're like, okay, that's me done. Okay, bye, and that's it. It's really weird.
Creates the threads between everything.
Yeah. I think, yeah. And but I guess what I was meaning in terms of the city specifically, I think has the depth as well. There's depth. Ali brings that depth to those projects, and so it's like you bring meaning to my ramblings, but like there's real depth and real consideration and real thought. And I think also the most important thing, challenge backwards. Like, so, why would we do that? What is the purpose for that? The real question of that. And then I think weirdly after you take that on, I then turn into almost producer and ask those questions back again. And then and it's almost then kind of goes into this weird
cyclical.
Yeah. So
that's great though. That sounds like, I'm kind of envious when I listen to that, because I feel like I really struggle to to have someone either ask me the right questions or to sort of, if it's a commission, it's easier because obviously there's a deadline and there is this sort of external force. But I think particularly on things that are more about the development of things that I am particularly interested in or drawn to, or the stories that really matter to me, I find that unfinished threads all over the place because of confidence or the belief that why would anyone want this, or how do I make this public. I started an album with a friend of sound recordings within 5 miles of each other. So he was recording his 5 mile radius, I was recording sounds of my 5 mile radius, and the fear of making that public meant that it has never gone anywhere. And I actually I even avoided him for a while, like a really good friend, and it's almost like it's still the thing that I guess I'm working on, is how do it's trying to get over that hump, because I think there are really and it's the hump, I think, which is the thing that you seem to have really nailed, Julian, which is just to sort of be like, the important thing is just to make. Don't worry about whether someone's going to listen to it or whether they care that you've done it or not. And I think I am getting there, age 43. And I wonder, and part of that I think is stepping away from social media, like properly stepping away from it, so that there's just this, I'm not thinking about what other people think of me in the same way anymore. It's embarrassing to admit that you care about that. I don't, but it's true. Like, it's had this huge impact on stopping me making things. So it's fine if I'm making something for somebody. It's like, I want a film, you know, I make a lot of little films, so it'd be like, you know, I want a little film about this exhibition that I'm doing, and I love doing that. I find it really relaxing, because it's like, I know what this person wants me to do, and it's there, and it's like, even if my name's on it, it's a bit like, yeah, fine. But when it's coming from the inside of my soul in some way or another, it's like the ability to just be like, I'm going to finish it and I'm going to put it over there. Whatever happens next is just irrelevant. But I've done it, I've made it, or I've experienced it, or I've recorded these things and I'm putting it out into the world, and like, that is still very uncomfortable for me. Whereas I feel incredibly comfortable with like someone else telling me their story and me going, here it is, like, we'll put it here, because that's not me. So yeah, the making is, and so I feel like actually the next period of my, well, I want the next period of my life to be much more being personally creative. Whether that's public or not, that's not really the point. It's the point of finishing things and putting them somewhere. And to not just have this, like, I've got hard drives of sounds and hard drives of all sorts of things, and it sort of, it makes me sad that I've not like found ways of completing those threads, or I'm sort of done with not being out there and open, I suppose. And I think, you know, I ran a company called Storyworks for 12 years, that started at the University of Glamorgan, and we went into liquidation in February 2023. Like, when Storyworks went into liquidation, the deep shame at like, and it was more or less a kind of post-COVID thing, but we'd been making storytelling work under Storyworks, which I always found easier because it had this name, and, you know, that wasn't me, sort of thing. And my immediate reaction was, well, that's it. That's me and Story's done. I'm going to be a speech and language therapist. So I applied to be a speech and language therapist, to do a course, and I got on that course, and I was basically like hiding from like everything, and was like, I'm just not going to, like, I can't possibly go back out into the world having publicly failed. So clearly failure is a big worry that I've had for a long time, you know, which has maybe stopped me doing lots of things. But yeah, like, this is a public, like, you can't, it's happened. It's, you know, you've gone into liquidation. I had to get a company to close the company down. I didn't have a job, because before then I could sort of think of, even though it was my own company, I don't know if you guys feel like this, it's like you still feel like you've got a job because you're employed by yourself, but it feels like it's sort of, it's validating in some way or another. And then my only choice in a way was, so I was like, I have to just do something completely else, and because then I can just be like, this door is closed, I'm moving into my speech and language therapist era. And then I just let myself sort of think about it for a while. There were some financial reasons why I couldn't go and do the degree, but I'm so glad I didn't, because basically I had to, it's been freeing to be like, and to be public about it. So at first I just hid away, but now, and then I reset up my website as Lisa Heledd Jones, and I've actually put in my website that my business went into liquidation. Like, I want to be honest and open and public, and public is the wrong word, but just be like, to stop hiding and being so afraid of failing, and being a bit more like, no, yeah, it was a absolute and utter failure at that point, but there were 12 years before that of like work, of experience, of stories, of people, of value in the world, you know, and yeah, and so in a way it's like really useful to have done something that feels like it's the thing that I was afraid of, which is, you know, for it to completely fuck up and then start again. And with having ADHD as well, I think the fear of like messing things up is so big, because there are, you know, I have double booked myself so many times. I've like, you know, there are so many things that I've done that, yeah, that fear has felt so significant in my life, that to be able to just be like, it's happened now, so I might as well just, you know, do things.
Yeah.
So it feels new. It feels new. It feels like I'm not hiding anymore. I wouldn't have said yes to doing this podcast 3 years ago. No way.
I'm so glad you said yes.
Well, yeah. Whereas now I'm like, yeah, because it'll be nice. I'll get to talk to some nice people and have an experience, and yeah, like it will be what it will be.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sort of like that. I think we're so conditioned to see or react to failure as a really, really bad thing. You know, that's just the way it is, isn't it? From school, you either pass or you fail. Failure is bad. You're always then trying to get to that success or that goal because that's good. And it's such a shame that, you know, that is the case, and that's often how we then continue with the rest of our lives to think of, you know, success is this, and achieving goals is the best thing you can do, and we always have to be in pursuit of that, which can be absolutely exhausting all the time, where, you know, then not embracing failure and seeing that also as, you know, something that can be kind of quite positive, because from that other things can grow, right? We just have a really funny perception of those two things, where really they just should be aligned. They're two things, they're slightly different, but each has its good things and its bad things related to those outcomes.
Definitely.
And yeah, it's such a shame that we do often feel shame, guilt around what can be perceived, or how we label, or society labels something as a failure, when, you know, actually it's just part of our learning and growth.
Yeah.
Equal to success, I think.
I do now.
Yeah.
I do now. And I think that, like, so it's, you know, 2 years since it happened. And I feel now like, yeah, that is it's a line in the sand, which I can feel is like I choose what comes next. The thing that so I listen to a lot of ADHD podcasts, and something I heard the other day was persistence over consistency. And like being consistent is really, really hard with ADHD, but I can be persistent. And I was like, oh, that's so freeing. And I think this is where language, I think, really helps, like the generous authority, or the, you know, some of these little nuggets are so really stay with me. There's the Brené Brown one, which I come back to all the time, which is don't shrink back, don't puff up, just stand your sacred ground. Love that, because that's the fear. The fear is like, am I being too puffed up? But I also don't want to totally shrink back. So it's like, just stand your sacred ground, right? And so those ways of then, like those lenses that we can choose to then put in the way that we see ourselves and the way that we look out onto the world, like that. And I do find that those little moments, the language can be so helpful for that. So if someone, like if one of you can find a name for what I do, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, maybe that's what.
Yeah, when we do, we'll let ourselves know as well.
Exactly, we'll let everyone know.
Yeah.
But I do think that's why artist is a really useful one, even though it conjures for a lot of people things that are not helpful, but I think that's true of every single word that exists. So, but it's, for me, it captures, I find it useful because it's like it can mean different things on different days with different people, and different projects. So and I think I am now finally comfortable with feeling like the way that I experience the world is multi-sensory, and what I want to put back out into the world is also that. And I think that is what artists do, and that is, regardless of the format or the material, that's what it's about. You did ask if there was anything that I would recommend in terms of like cultural things. Was that the thing?
Yeah.
Tell us.
So I wanted to. I did think of a couple of things. So there's a book that I had got given to me recently, which I just have absolutely loved, and it is called Homebody by Rupi. I don't know how to say her surname actually, but it's a poetry, and it is absolutely amazing. And it's sort of got the 4 sections are mind, heart, rest, awake, and it is, I find it's extraordinary. And she says at the beginning, after feeling disconnected for so long, my mind and body are finally coming back to each other. And I really feel like that's somewhere in where I am at in my life right now. But I think it's really, really beautiful. And I'm more of an audio book person, but I can read poetry because there's like 6 lines. And there's a theatre company called Shit Theatre who have a new show at the moment, and it's about grief. And they're a company, and I think it's just really interesting as when you've been involved in something for a long time, and like when you've watched companies like Shit Theatre go, I used to see them in Edinburgh a long, long time ago, and you see their work over many years, and they sort of sit alongside you in terms of like, you can remember when you saw them in your 20s, that kind of thing. And with Shit Theatre, seeing their most recent show, which is on tour soon, is about grief. And obviously, as you get older, you've experienced lots of different things, and I think grief has been a big part of my life in the last few years as well. And but yeah, that show is absolutely amazing. And finally, I was going to recommend a podcast, which is Ezra Klein's podcast from New York Times, and it's in a world of with politics, so with things happening across the world, it's very discombobulating, and Ezra Klein is this extraordinary voice of reason. And the thing that I love about his podcast is that he goes deep with people. So he will have these people on who are experts at Palestine, Israel, or like what's happening with like tariffs and Trump, and he doesn't assume you don't understand. He lets you go deep with it. Often I don't understand, but I find it so good in a world of things often being so short and quick, to have these hour-long podcasts offered, which goes into detail. I really, really love, and I find it reassuring that he exists in the world doing what he's doing.
They're amazing recommendations. I'll pop all of those in the show notes for everyone so that they can access that. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been amazing speaking with you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Crafted Reality. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And of course, if you want to support the podcast and access exclusive content, head over to our Patreon. We'll be back next month.